This program is brought to you by realestate.com.au. Keep moving with Australia's #1 address in property.
It's great to have your company here on Business Now. Well, over the weekend around the country, there were 2,451 auctions. The clearance rate just under 59%. Now, in Sydney, the clearance rate was down a touch at 56.8%, and there were 937 auctions. In Melbourne, it was stronger, 961 auctions, and just over 65% of those sold. But in Brisbane, much quieter, 110 auctions and just 44.5% of those sold. But Adelaide does remain strong, the strongest in the country. 87 auctions, more than 70% of those were cleared. And in Canberra, also pretty strong, 54 auctions and a clearance rate there also above 70%. But look, being the first Monday of a new month, we also get a glimpse about home prices around the country. And to take us through all that, we're joined by Angus, senior economist with RBA Group. Angus, always good to chat to you. I want to take you through this because it does seem as though that interest rate cut has spurred a bit of interest in the housing markets, and that's also underpinned house prices, which nationally now are back at record levels.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ross. It does look that way. We saw home prices up in February, and particularly notably, they were up in our largest cities in Melbourne and Sydney quite strongly. Melbourne saw prices up 0.7 in the month, which is the strongest growth it's seen in about 3 years, basically since the RBA started raising rates. So it does look like Melbourne's maybe starting to turn a bit of a corner there after a pretty soft period over the last few years.
It's interesting, isn't it? You just look at that graphic there that we've got up on the screen, and it really does show that of all those capital cities, it is Melbourne that's a standout. You've got Brisbane strong, you've got Adelaide really strong, you've got Perth strong, but when you sit there and have a look at it, it's Melbourne that really has dragged its chain.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If we look over the past few years or so, since the RBA started raising rates, we've continued to see really strong home price growth in the smaller capitals in Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth. And, that's been true over the past year as well. Prices in Brisbane have been up 10%, they've been up 12%, in Adelaide 13%, in Perth, those are very strong numbers in an environment in which interest rates have gone up extremely quickly and put housing affordability at very challenging levels. And the same just hasn't been true in Melbourne. Prices are actually down over the past 12 months, about 2.5%, and down about 5% if we look back to where they were before the RBA started raising rates. So it really has been a pretty sluggish period for Melbourne, and maybe that's starting to change. We did see prices up pretty strongly in February. It is just 1 month. Never want to put too much weight on 1 month, but it is a big change from where they've been.
Okay, so can I take you back, because there's almost a strategy an investor or even a young home buyer can go with, and that is if you go to all of those major capital cities, leave Sydney kind of out of it a little bit, but if you go and buy in what appears to be the basket case of a capital city at any point in time, it generally rebounds and goes back to its natural position. In Melbourne's case, that's number 2, and we've got a graphic here that can show people this, but it seems as though Melbourne's out of whack with the rest of the capital cities right now.
Yeah, Melbourne prices do look relatively cheap compared to elsewhere in the country. Still, look, housing affordability there is quite challenging as well, just given where mortgage rates are. But it just hasn't seen the same increase in home prices as other parts of the country. And so, relatively speaking, it does look on the more affordable end compared to what we're seeing, especially in Sydney, which is often the case given how expensive Sydney is, but even relative to some of the smaller capitals. That's also true in rental markets. One of the kind of staggering things we've seen in the past few years is, really strong rental growth in particularly smaller markets, though, we've also seen strong growth in Sydney and Melbourne. But what that's meant is median advertised rents in Adelaide today, which is often kind of a close comparison for Melbourne given their relative geographic proximity, median rents in Adelaide are actually more expensive than in Melbourne today by about $10, which is kind of wild when you consider how much bigger Melbourne is and the fact that it is a higher income city than Adelaide.
Angus, many thanks for your time.